What is up, Blue Green Trading? This is strength and conditioning coach Jesse Grund, and for this week's topic, I want to talk about how adaptation occurs, or in layman's terms, how we go from doing nothing to being able to do a whole lot. Now, this is really important to consider and why we emphasize creating a strong base, a strong fitness base, before adding a bunch of volume to it. And I'll try and break down and explain why, and then if you have to add volume, how you add volume intelligently. So back in 1956, a German scientist came up with the concept of general adaptation syndrome. And what basically that means is when we get the stimuli of stress on a system, how does the system adapt to that stress? So first, there's an alarm phase. So in that alarm phase, your body starts to fatigue, and that's where the soreness comes from. That's when that you deadlift that 305 for the first time, and your body has to then go, woof, all right, this is something I'm now going to have to overcome. That's when it starts to shift into the resistance phase. Now, that resistance phase is really important. That's when it senses that stimuli and starts to build all the things necessary to be able to overcome that stimuli or that stressor again. Now, one of two things can happen in the third phase, which we term the exhaustion phase. There's either the concept of supercompensation or overtraining. And this is really important. So supercompensation is what we want. That's when the system has enough time under correct protocols of training or correct progression to then be able to adapt to that stressor by building the muscle mass or aerobic endurance. You know, that could be mitochondrial density or red blood cell count. It could be a number of different things. And then it has the opportunity to be able to do that in an environment where it now can, the next time it faces that stimulus, have all the things necessary to overcome it. That's when smart training comes into play. However, if the stressor is too great, if we don't have the capacity to do it, and it's too much stress and there's not enough recovery, then we can start getting into overtraining. Now, overtraining can actually be planned. We can go through a overtraining phase that doesn't necessarily hurt us. That's specific to what we're trying to do. And those are very short, and that's exceptions, not the rule. The rule tends to be we never want to go into overtraining, because overtraining has a bunch of effects on our nervous system. Then we start looking at sympathetic versus parasympathetic response, where our sympathetic nervous system is working overdrive. So that means we're going to increase things like cortisol production. Stress levels are going to end up being higher. You're more likely to get hurt and injured. All these things end up occurring. What we want is we want that parasympathetic, think of it like a parachute, to kind of slow our nervous system down. This is why having a strong base and building a base intelligently with your training is super important. If I'm training 5 days a week and I want to increase my training to then be able to achieve whatever it is I'm trying to achieve, I can't necessarily go from 5 days a week of training the way I'm training right now to suddenly 8, 9, 10 training sessions a week, because of the fact that we're going to enter that overtraining phase. Adaptations to stress and stimulus, they all occur during the recovery phase of whatever we're doing. If we go back to the way the general adaptation syndrome works, we're actually recovering, and that's what's building the body up to be able to do whatever it is that we want to do again, which is super, super important. So that kind of goes into the stimulus, recovery, fatigue, adaptation theory that builds along with the general adaptation theory, which is that once we stimulate the system, we need time for it to, we need to fatigue it. It's got to be a strong enough stimulus to fatigue it, and then we're going to adapt to whatever it is. But I can't do that in an environment where I am overtraining, because then my body is just in this fight or flight all the time. And if my goal is to get better, I can't always stay in fight or flight. Instead, I need to be intelligent about how I'm putting my training sessions together to be able to build myself up to increasing the volume of how I'm training week in, week out. We don't want to increase our risks of injury. We don't want to increase the possibilities that I'm going to break down metabolically. We don't want to decrease the effectiveness of my sleep, all for the sake of adding extra volume in your week. It doesn't work like that. Instead, we have to be intelligent about it. And there's a couple different ways that we can do that. One, we can turn up the current intensity in the sessions that I am currently doing. So if I'm training 5 days a week or 4 days a week, maybe I make those sessions more intense. That can be decreasing rest in my work to rest ratios. That can be increasing my volume, increasing my RPE on my lifts, maybe adding a little bit of extra volume to the end of my workouts. But then I'm going to give my system enough chance to be able to adapt to whatever it is that I'm trying to do. If I suddenly try and add 2, 3, 4 extra workouts in the week, my system's not going to know what to do with that. We're talking about increasing almost a full 100% of what you're doing right now. 60% more from a workout perspective is a whole lot more. That's a lot more stimulus. It's a lot more stress. And remember, the body doesn't know what you're doing as anything other than stress. And every stressor matters. Every stressor you experience in your life, every variable, every bit of stress is super important to consider. So, thing number one, your current training, we can increase the intensity of what we're doing, increase the RPEs, decrease work to rest ratios so that we're increasing a little bit more intensity, trying to find that place where we're increasing those things. As I'm increasing volume, maybe my increases in volume start to become focused more on concentric muscle action. So we know that concentric muscle action, which is, I'll give you an example. So if I'm doing a bicep curl, right? Take my hand, pull it here, that's a concentric muscle action. Eccentric muscle action is lengthening that arm out. Really important to consider. That lengthening mechanism is where most of the tissue damage occurs whenever we're doing anything from a muscular perspective. So when you're deadlifting, it's the lengthening, not necessarily the contracting. So if I want to increase and add extra workouts, then maybe the right move is to then add some concentric focused workouts where there's less muscle fatigue on me, and I'm really emphasizing more the concentric muscle action. A really good example of that is something like sled pushing. It's all concentric muscle action, or battle rope. It's going to be less degrading on my system as a whole to work that specific muscle action. The other thing that I can do is start to look at other elements of my fitness and my health and start incorporating those elements in to add extra volume. Maybe my mobility is awful. I can't bend over and touch my toes. My hips don't move whatsoever at all. My neck basically turns like Batman in a mask. It just doesn't work. Maybe my extra volume then is to improve those things so that I can improve the quality of the stuff that I'm doing currently in my sessions. There is going to be a period when I am going to have to increase volume, and I have to account for that. There are going to be times when you are required to train more than that one time of PT, and I totally understand that. But as we're preparing for something, we shouldn't go from a little to nothing. I spoke on this recently where I said, we can't go from the couch to running a marathon. Nobody ever does that, right? How many couch to marathon programs have you seen online? Usually couch to 5K or couch to 10K, because of the fact that that increase needs to take time. You have to remember you're trying to teach the system to do something, to remember something, to remember what you are doing. The only way to do that is to do that intelligently by building that great fitness base first, and then tweaking those things and increasing the quality of what you do, the intensity of what you do, instead of necessarily just increasing the volume of what you do, because that's just going to be noise to your system. And you want the body and the system to adapt and remember what you are doing. So remember, training takes time. It needs to be intelligent so that we don't get into that overtraining place. And instead, we can keep ourselves healthier, we can get stronger, we can get faster, and we can create more endurance by properly progressing what we are doing.